Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Spiro Batistatos. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the South Shore Convention and Visitors Authority. Happy Tourism Week to everyone, and let's be for sure this is one of the most interesting ones we have ever had and hopefully will ever have is the case. I'm very pleased to kick off our 3-seminar week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday this week, as we take a look at the road to recovery. And I've asked three of the leading minds in this field today, especially in the hotel circle, to give us a look at where we were, where we are, and where we're going. I'll have our moderator introduce them. My job is to thank all of you for joining, and on behalf of our board of directors and the incredibly talented staff I get to work with every day, it's our pleasure to have you. And with that, I would like to introduce a man who in the DMO space needs no introduction, but to the rest of you who have not had the chance to meet him, it's a real pleasure to have Bill moderate the series. And then on Friday with Dr. O from Purdue Northwest, wrap up and give us the roadmap based on Wednesday's presentation from, I'm drawing a break, arrivalist and destination analysts that'll give us the information from a consumer point of view. And then on Friday, wrap it all up so that we can get a better direction of how we're going to move forward. We did have an exciting Friday with the governor of Indiana opening up the state slowly, and the phases were laid out. So hopefully today, and may the 4th be with you, but May 4th will be a turning point for us to start looking at how we're going to deal with many of these. So without any further ado, Bill Geist, whose title is Chief Instigator with a company called DMO Pros. It's a firm specializing in strategic planning, organizational advocacy, governance, marketing, and legislative issues for destination marketing organizations across the Americas. Since 1995, and he had his 25-year anniversary this last week, Bill's worked with over 200 DMOs from Alaska to Belize. Bill was the CEO of the Greater Madison, Wisconsin CVB, directed the Kankakee, Illinois CVB prior to that, and oversaw a number of top-drawer tourism events, including the Domino's Pizza Outboard Powerboat National Championships. Even before his first DMO gig decades ago, the foundation of his marketing experience came from his years in live broadcast media, a lot of nights at the Holiday Star Theater, and the greater Chicago market. Bill is also contributing author to the Destinations International sponsored Fundamentals in Destination Marketing book, and is currently a board member of the Destinations International Foundation. With that, it is my great pleasure to have my friend Bill Geist here today. And Bill, take it away.
Spiro, thank you very much. And as I've said before, I am sure that we met in that previous life when you were at the Plaza Theater, because I know I introduced Blue Oyster Cult. So, and I bet you were backstage. So anyway, as Spiro said, to all of you, happy Tourism Week, which sounds weird in these unsettled times, but we still proudly salute this industry that now more than ever before, we know it helps power this nation's economy. As industry thought leader and another one of our friends, Maura Gast, once said, it all starts with the visit. And everything does, from economic development to quality of life. It's the visit that comes first, and it's destination marketing organizations like the South Shore Convention and Visitors Authority that are the agencies that inspire those visits every single day. I wish so much that I could be there with you in person as I was a couple of years ago. Today's virtual format, however, allows us to still share information and stories as the South Shore CBA always does during National Tourism Week. Now, due to the size of the audience, which is already clicked in at over 50, we won't be able to take questions live, but down here in the lower nav bar, there's a Q&A button. Please forward your questions, and at the end of each of our 2 presentations, and at the close of this webinar, we'll take as many of those questions as we possibly can. We'll be monitoring those questions, and we will ask them on your behalf. So our presenters this afternoon are veterans of the travel industry. Please welcome Jennifer Foster, a business development executive for the destinations team at STR. She joined STR in 2015. She is responsible for building and maintaining positive relationships with destination clients located in the Southeast, Midwest, and East Coast regions of the US, as well as Mexico and the Caribbean. She is often featured as a guest speaker at hotel industry meetings and conventions. Prior to joining STR, Jennifer served as the regional sales manager for Mayflower Tours and Vacation Express, where she worked on worldwide tour packages for groups and travel agencies. She's a graduate of Vanderbilt University with a bachelor's degree in European studies. She resides in Nashville, Tennessee, with her husband, Dave. A little bit more on STR. They are the company that provides clients from multiple market sectors with premium global data benchmarking, analytics, and marketplace insights. STR was acquired in October of 2019 by CoStar Group, the leading provider of commercial real estate information, analytics, and online marketplaces. Also on our program today is Thomas Harzinski. He has 30 years of experience in the public policy arena as a public official and as a consultant. He specializes in providing economic and financial research to public agencies and private developers involved in economic development initiatives such as conventions, sports and entertainment markets, and the associated real estate developments. In January of 2000, he started the Chicago office of HVS as its managing director. Thomas has studied and helped to implement convention centers and hotel initiatives in major U.S. markets such as New York, Chicago, Nashville, and New Orleans. His sports facility project experience includes Miller Park in Milwaukee and Lambeau Field in Green Bay, along with various other stadiums, arenas, and motorsports facilities. His performing arts facility project experience includes the Milwaukee Theater and arts venues in Little Rock and Salt Lake City. Internationally, he has worked on convention center and/or mixed-use resort projects in Berlin, Cairo, Copenhagen, Geneva, Mexico City, Sydney, and Melbourne. Tom holds a master's degree in public policy from the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago, where he specialized in municipal finance. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Chicago, Harris School of Public Policy, and at Roosevelt University's Manfred Steinfeld School of Hospitality and Tourism Management. Tom, Jennifer, thank you so much. Why don't we kick off our afternoon of data and hold on to your seats, everybody, because this is going to be a rocky road. But Jennifer, let's start from a global perspective with you and then begin to drill down on just what we're seeing, what we had, what we have now, and where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys very much for having me today. This webinar is close to my heart, a little more so than usual. My hometown, I was born and raised in Valparaiso, Indiana, so I'm very familiar with the region as a whole, and moved down to Nashville for college, but you know, all my family still lives in Valpo, so that area is near and dear to my heart. I'm happy to present the data, hotel data performance data today. I'm going to attempt to share my screen right now for the slide deck. Okay, does that look, can everybody see that? Hopefully so.
Great. Looks great.
Okay, great, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to spend about 15 minutes rolling through about 30 slides of performance data. We're gonna start with a total US review, where things have been, where things are going, and then we're gonna drill down into Lake County specifically, and then finish up with the US forecast. So for the total US performance review, just to show what the picture looked like at the end of 2019, we really had finished the year in a rather anemic place. Supply growth and demand growth were in equilibrium at 2% growth. We were seeing flat occupancy growth at the end of the year, 0.0%, but we were still achieving very full rooms with 66% of rooms full. Average daily rate had slowed very much downward to 1% growth, and RevPar coming in at 0.9% growth. So we were still achieving records in 5 out of the 6 KPIs across the board, but that trend had been slowing down for quite some time. So that just is a look at where we were ending in 2019. Fast forward through January and February of 2020, where results were a little bit better than expected. And then we dive right here into March of 2020. You can see the metrics across the board. Room demand down 41.2%, which has led to a decline in occupancy of negative 42%. RevPAR down over 50%, and average daily rate growth down 16.5%. So RevPAR decline of over 50%. This is the steepest decline we have ever seen in STR history, our 35 years. We were we're going to look at some of the numbers from the previous recessions, but you'll see when we get to those slides that really this is not even comparable. It's such a degree of greater change than we've seen previously. So we're really looking at things across the board in a different light right now. What we try to do is use the 12-month moving average to really take the entire year into account. Around June of the year, I'll start doing year-to-date numbers, but that's kind of meaningless at this point in time. So we really still try to look at that 12-month moving average or rolling 12 months. You can see for the rolling 12 months, that 1 month of March data really skewed the metrics down. Room supply stayed in pace at 2%, but room demand declined 1.8%, occupancy down -3.8%, average daily rate just about flat, and RevPAR growth down -3.8%. This is a look at the interplay between supply and demand growth and the long-term moving average. You can easily see the previous recessions on this chart back in the early 1990s, looking at 9/11 into the housing market crisis, and here we are in March of 2020, and you can see with that blue line in the previous months we'd been at an equilibrium between the supply and demand growth, and all of a sudden that demand growth shoots down -1.8%. And that's just seen for, you know, March, probably the last 2 weeks rather. Once we get into April figures, this will decline a great deal more. So the long run moving trends, they're just cratering, as we can see here. That average daily rate now negative growth there, along with the occupancy growth at -3.8%. And RevPAR growth, like I said at the beginning, -51.9%. We had to reset the margins and the access to show that much of a RevPAR decline. You can see after 9/11, we just saw about 25% RevPAR decline at the steepest point. And then again at the housing market crisis, little bit less than that, but we were still only seeing at the very bottom -20% growth or so, versus right now we're just seeing for March -51.9%. So in order to try to shed some light on the data, and what we at STR do typically is look at historic trends to better understand the downturns, and we can at least leave you with some trends that we have found and recovery periods that we've seen previously. So average daily rate rebounding after external shock takes time. We always see after a black swan event or recession decline in ADR growth. And here we're looking at the recovery time period. So after 9/11, we went from $85 of average daily rate. It cratered down for 12 months before it reached the bottom. And then it spent 24 months to recover to get back up to the $85. So what we see with 9/11 is similar to the housing market crisis, which at the start of that, the average daily rate was $108. It cratered down for 19 months before it reached the bottom, and then it took 37 months to get back to that former peak of $108. So the trends here are very clear in terms of recovery time being approximately double the amount of time that after we've seen that low peak when it hits the bottom there. This is just showing that index again, index to the event for both 9/11 and the housing market crisis, just showing once again those declines and the length of time to get back to the previously normal rate. So I wanted to show a few slides to take into account the Lake County market. This slide is really interesting to me, and just showing the segmentation right now for the total US. Rural versus non-rural areas, it is very clear that the rural hotels recover much more quickly than the non-rural hotels. So something to keep in mind for specific marketplaces. And I apologize, I came into the office and there's an automatic light fixture that goes off, so just had to wave that around. As we look into segmentation, group, which is considered by STR to be a room block of 10 or more rooms, versus transient, which is considered to be basically everything else. We look at group versus transient demand and where those rebounds have taken place previously. We can see here after the housing market crisis that the transient demand percent change came back much more quickly than that group demand percent change. In fact, that group demand continued to plummet for many more months and took a much longer time to rebound. So when we look at those rebounds, we certainly know that transient will come back much more quickly than group. So that was the monthly results for March of 2020. I really wanted what many of our clients and DMOs and hotels have been asking from STR recently if they were only previously receiving monthly data, which by the time you get that data, you're already halfway into the next month, and everyone really wants more timely data in this day and age in this particular downturn. So we also have 7 slides or so showing weekly performance data, the most previous week ending April the 25th. So what we see here for weekly data, RevPAR declines in the 80% range are now the norm, negative 78.4% RevPAR percent change. This is actually slightly better than the last 2 weeks. Hopefully that is an indication that the first 2 weeks in April were the lowest point there, and we're seeing just a very mild uptick. Still remains to be seen, but as these stay-at-home orders are backed away from and more states are opening, we hope these numbers will start to trend a little bit better. We're also tracking the percentage of closed rooms at STR. Right now, we're showing almost 15% of rooms out of inventory temporarily due to COVID. To keep in mind, this is a percentage based on hotels that participate with STR. So we have about a 76% sample of total hotels rooms in the US that are participating. So for that, 20% sample that we don't, we are not tracking those closed rooms of those independents that don't participate. So this number is very likely a great deal more than the 15%, but that's what we show based on our current hotel participants. And this is just showing that running 7 RevPAR percent change in terms of the COVID cases and seeing that line there. And you can really see where things started to plummet down in mid-March, and as the cases rise, so have those negative declines in RevPAR. So for class performance, we're seeing a lot of these same metrics week over week, which in general, the luxury class has been the hardest hit. This very much makes sense to us. A lot of the luxury full service properties are reliant on that group business, and that group business is practically non-existent now. So we're really seeing those upper upscale and luxury classes the hardest hit. The classes that have seen not as steep of a hit have certainly been in the mid-scale and economy. Those are showing still obviously over 50% RevPAR percent change. So they're seeing that, but it's not to such a steep of a rate as those upper upscale and luxury. And class performance, we are finally back as of this most recent week, all classes showing at the very least double-digit percent occupancy, which had not been the case over previous weeks, especially again for those high-end scales. Economy class continues to see the greatest in terms of occupancy with almost 40% occupied. And we also track at STR location performance. So here you can see everything from urban, suburban, airport, which those have of course been hit the hardest, and resort. But where we see areas not quite as hard hit are the interstate locations and small metro towns. So looking into the metrics for Lake County specifically, this is where the county was as of 2019 year end. So really what I take away from this slide is you guys had seen a great deal of growth, and 2019 was quite the banner year. Room supply coming in at 6.3% growth, which is quite steep. However, room demand just crushing the supply with 14.2% growth, leading to occupancy growth of 7.4%, average daily rate growth of almost 2%, and RevPar growth of 9.4%. Room revenue growth at over 16%, and you all were seeing highest ever room supply, highest ever room demand, and room revenue for year end. So ADR and RevPar hit the highest ever as well in October of 2019. So a banner year across the board. When we look into the March 2020 data, the figures are similar to the total US. Room supply at 1.5%, still positive growth, but you see that demand plummeting 41.7%, leading to negative occupancy growth of negative 42. Average daily rate, negative 17, and RevPAR, negative 52% growth. In terms of ADR, people have been asking us, okay, so average daily rate decreases almost 20%. In the past, we would typically show an ADR decrease as hotels were lowering rates to try to drum up demand. That's not what we're seeing in this environment. There's not much demand to be had. So it's more a factor of the composition of the business. You know, anything that had previously been group business booked at a premium, those rates have gone away. We're seeing a lot more in the economy and mid-scale classes, and much less in terms of the upper upscale and luxury. So those average daily rate declines right now, we believe, is a big, that has to do with the composition of the business. And as we look into the 12-month moving average for March of 2020, the metrics, because you guys have been coming off such banner years for 2019 and even into the first 2 months of 2020, the metrics are currently for 12-month moving average much less skewed than the total US. That room supply is still hefty at 5.4% growth. Room demand still outpacing at 5.7% growth, which keeps occupancy relatively flat, but still positive. Average daily rate down 1%, and RevPAR just 0.8% decline, but room revenue still coming in at 4.6%. I'll be very interested to see how the April data proceeds to look for the market. That'll bring some things down, but the really just positive metrics that have been trending in the area will certainly help that 12-month moving average be less skewed than the total US. This is the supply and demand percent change for 12-month moving average since 2004. You can see the recession clearly from the housing market crisis. Going into 2014, not quite sure why the supply and demand were impacted on a negative basis there, but you can really see the growth since 2016 above, with supply and demand both trending very upwards above 10% here with the demand, and now they're almost in equilibrium. So definitely seeing the market dynamics there interplaying with each other. And just looking at the housing market crisis and ADR rebound, you guys were at $83 of average daily rate, and then that came down to around $74. And after 37 months, as we end in 2014 there, we can see it was just back up to $77. So for Lake County, it was a much slower trajectory to pick up that average daily rate and get back to the previous peak. That being said, when I ran these same numbers for demand, demand was reached much earlier than the total US based on the previous increase, and occupancy as well beat the total US by a couple of years in terms of rebound. So while rate took a little bit longer to get back to previous peaks. Demand rebounded very quickly, revenue and occupancy rebounded very quickly as well. Quickly in terms of total US, I should clarify. So looking ahead at the forecast, this forecast was produced basically a month ago, and it's already outdated. We produced an updated forecast based on 3 weeks of very unclean data. So it was our best guess to try to look at the industry. And at that point, we're very confident that demand growth will be at least 50% on a decline, if not more, which bringing supply down and offline 15%, occupancy at negative 42%, rate down almost 14%, and a RevPAR decline for the year of negative 50%. This will likely be adjusted and skewed further downward. We're going to produce a new forecast for the total US that should be out either this week or early next week. So stay on the outlook for that. That will also put the 2021 forecast in jeopardy. We, at this point, do not see demand growth recovering at, as we said here, 81%, but stay tuned for those updated numbers. We now feel with having March and April under our belts that we'll be able to make a better projection based on our friends at Tourism Economics and their GDP forecasts and putting that together in conjunction. And just a look to see where that math lies for 2019 RevPAR of $87. If we look into what we're forecasting right now for 2021 for RevPAR at $70, that's a 20% decrease. So you can see in comparison for 2013, that was the RevPAR number is $68. So we're really taking a step back there in terms of ADR, and that's what we've consistently seen in the industry, but right now it's just to a much steeper rate. So just some high-level takeaways for both the country as a whole and Lake County. The industry is currently seeing some of the steepest declines in growth we've ever recorded in our 35-year history at STR. The Lake County recovery during previous recessions fared better than the total US overall. Group demand has certainly been hit the hardest and faces a much longer recovery over the transient demand. Interstate hotels are clearly outperforming all other locations, which is helpful for Lake County given the composition of the hotels there. And updated US forecast revision will be coming soon. And just to conclude, the Stockdale paradox is something we find kind of to be uplifting right now. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to comfort the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. We know that we will recover, we will rebound from this. It will take some time, but we certainly will be coming back and having those metrics rebound, and we look forward to doing that with you. All right, that brings me to the conclusion of my deck. I'm going to stop sharing. There we go.
Great. Tom, why don't you start to share? I've got a question for you, Jennifer, and thank you so much. I've never enjoyed hearing such bad news so much.
Thanks.
But I want to double down on that one comment that you made about the fact that occupancy off 42%, but average daily rate down 17%. And there are some interests out there that believe that by slashing rate, they'll encourage people to stay at their hotel. That's the whole supply and demand thing that is always in play. But in this case, when people are scared to travel, dropping rate would be a mistake. And I just would like your thoughts, because I watched it in real time during the hurricane season that took out Gulf Shores and also over in Biloxi. And I mean, it really was the tale of two cities, if you will, is however they did it, Gulf Shores held rate pretty close. Biloxi went to fire sale, where you could get like a $150 room for $39.99. It took Biloxi years to recover rate, and Gulf Shores really was pretty much back in the game the following year. So your thoughts on how hotels in this moment in time should be dealing with things like rate?
So at STR, we really can't provide instruction on what we think hotels should do. We can just speak to what we've seen historically in terms of trends. And I will say what has always surprised us is even in an environment where you've got peak, occupancy is peaked out, rooms are very full, and you would think there'd be the ability to drive rate. We have not seen that rate being driven to the extent that we would assume that it could be. And the same thing holds true when you look at decline hotels reducing rate in the environment to try to tap into that demand. It's not for me to say what hotels should do with rate, but you can see from the trends how long it takes to recover when you drop that rate. And given the environment, trying to push through, you can only do yourself a favor by, like you said, trying to maintain that. But to each hotel's credit, they have their own strategy. We can just speak to trends and say that it certainly is a long recovery period for that rate to come back up. So keeping that in mind.
Great point. Thank you so much. Mr. Hazinski, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation. HVS does a lot of work for the hotel industry in doing valuations and appraisals. My division focuses on convention, sports, and entertainment facilities, and we serve a lot of government entities and also DMOs who are involved in enhancing their tourist destinations, expanding or creating conventions and conference facilities or other types of facilities. So like all of you, we have been struggling with how we best serve our clients in this period. And one of the things we thought we could do is really help in terms of diagnosing the problem. And so that's what we've when I'm presenting here. And we recently published an article on the impact of COVID-19 on lodging tax revenues. And what I want to do today is present a summary of that work. The reason we did this is because lodging taxes are such a critical source of support for the convention and tourism industries. I think that the role of this source and the government intervention in the industry is often understated. The lodging taxes fund debt service for the construction of convention centers, arenas, all kinds of public assembly facilities. It provides the largest share of funding for DMOs, and it also covers the operating deficits of convention centers. And many communities rely on lodging taxes for support of the arts and tourism, promotion, and other governmental operations. So as Jennifer has shown, this pandemic has dealt a bigger blow to the hospitality industry than we've ever witnessed. One has to go back to the Great Depression where data isn't available to really understand this impact. So we have to try to figure out how we're going to respond to this dislocation. And our first thought is it's important to know the magnitude of the problem if we're going to solve it. HVS is, we rely a lot on SDR data. Thank God for SDR, or we would have very much more limited window as to what's going on in the industry. And in our study, we relied a lot on SDR data for certain markets. But in trying to break the problem down, I think about the impact of COVID-19 as having two types. The first is what we're in now, and it's the experience of these draconian travel restrictions that we're under. Some of them are starting to be lifted now. General fear of travel, but it's all related to the health outcomes, right? So this impact is going to be temporary. We don't know how long for sure. Epidemiologists have a lot of different views on this, and it depends on whether effective treatments come on board, how soon a vaccine comes on board, how effective certain measures of social distancing are. We're learning a lot about that. I read today that there are 70 different trials of treatments for COVID, not a vaccine, but treatments. And so if some of those come to fruition, we may become much more skillful at dealing with this. So we have to deal with a question of how long that impact is going to last, how long we're going to be afraid to travel because we're afraid of dying, basically. And then the second impact is the recovery, which Jennifer had talked about, is how long is this recovery going to take? We're hitting a recession that, or a decline that is kind of unprecedented, but its reasons are unprecedented as well. So how is the economy going to bounce back from that? I think it's very safe to assume that recovery will take a long time for a lot of reasons. There's been a tremendous loss of income. In the last month, consumer spending was down over 7%. And that's 70% of the US economy. So even when people want to travel, it's going to be a question of whether they're able to afford it, when our business is going to be able to afford, and when is group travel going to become part of corporate budgets, and when our association is going to be able to hold their meetings again. So these are the two phases we try to deal with in our analysis. So we used our annual lodging tax studies. So for the past 8 years now, we've been gathering data on lodging tax revenue collections in 150 major US cities. And so we combine that with information on our projections of hotel performance in 25 major US cities. And because of the level of uncertainty associated with this, we have done a best and worst case scenarios. Just to get to the bottom line, in these 25 major US markets, we projected a range of loss of revenues over the next 5 years of between 4.6 and $6.8 billion. Substantial revenue losses. So let's talk through this. And we've done a lot of what Jennifer has done in terms of modeling this based on past experience. And let me show you what we're seeing in these urban markets. Now this data will not tie out with what Jennifer showed you because it's for a different set of markets. It's urban markets, and as Jennifer pointed out, they behave very differently than rural markets. So if we look at history from 2000 to 2019, we see the effects of the two recessions on occupancy, ADR, and RevPar, and that long road to recovery from a nadir. This is the financial crisis in 2009, and its recovery finally in 2013 and 14. And we also focus specifically on RevPar, because to forecast lodging tax revenues, you need to know what taxable rooms revenue are going to be, and that that can be measured with RevPar. So this is the monthly RevPar during the recessions and the recovery periods. We had year-to-date, we're collecting the STR data weekly on these 25 markets. And so what we see in terms of the decline in 2020 so far is in these markets, RevPar has to date declined by $55. And we project that if these weekly trends continue in place, that it will fall below $20 RevPar. So this is the depth of the decline, and you can see how it doesn't really compare to anything we saw in 2001 or 2009. Those gray areas are actually the months of the recession, how long that recession lasted. If we then look at it, the monthly percent change in RevPar from the prior year, and that's what this graph shows. And we see two different patterns of recovery here. One is a V-shaped recovery where there's a fairly quick bounce back, and then a shorter term growth to positive territory in the 2001 recession that started occurring in late 2002, where we actually had positive monthly growth. In the Great Recession, it was more of a U-shaped recovery. So we saw several months of decline and then lesser decline. So we almost had a 2-year period of 2+ year period of monthly percent declines. And then we had growth, which then leveled out to where we were recently in kind of markets in equilibrium in 2019, where growth in RevPAR was flat. So we use those two models of recovery for best and worst case. So the best case was a V-shaped recovery, and the worst case was a U-shaped recovery. So here's the assumptions that we used in our forecasting. So the first was to deal with this travel restriction period. What are we going to assume about that? And in the best case, we assume that that the travel restrictions are going to continue to have an impact through the summer. Now, we know now at the beginning of May that some states are lifting their travel restrictions to some extent, others are not. But even the immediate lifting of those travel restrictions doesn't mean that people are going to start traveling again. But we assume that most of them are lifted in July of 2020, and then we start a slow recovery as people start traveling again, first with business travel, then with like auto-driven leisure travel, and then and finally followed by group travel. In the worst case scenario, we assume that we don't get the health outcomes that we desire, that we're hoping to get, and that some form of travel restrictions come ebb and flow through the end of the year. This kind of assumes like a second wave of the virus that is causing certain types of lockdown. Although we don't view that as bad as the first months, because we do think we should be better at dealing with it from a health perspective. So we have some improvement in occupancy and ADR in July through December, and then a gradual easing up. So after that's over, then okay, boom, we're in a recession. And so in the best case scenario, we assume that the 2001 kind of V-shaped recovery, and we looked at the percentage change in RevPAR in these 25 markets over that period, and we apply those percentage changes to where we are when we come out of the travel restrictions. And similarly, in the worst case scenario, we applied the 2008-9 recession recovery patterns. And this is what our forecast looks like for RevPAR changes in these major US markets. So in the best case, in 2020, we're dropping to $50. In the worst case, we're dropping to $43. And then in the recovery scenarios, we're not back to our, in the best case, we're back in 4 years. And in the worst case, we're back in 2025 or 2026. So, so then we translated this into what the changes in lodging tax revenues would be. So we had data on the amount of lodging tax in these 25 markets. And in 2019, they were generating about $3.6 billion of revenue. So we assume that is a baseline. And let's say we imagine the world where COVID never happened and we had so the moderate growth that we were experiencing continue. We created this baseline scenario. And then we took that against the best case scenario. So a loss of 2.1 billion in 2020, and those losses decline year over year. So we show a strong recovery in 2021, but it's still substantially below what the baseline would have been. And we have this slow path to recovery. And in the worst case scenario, the numbers are bigger, the baseline is the same, but we have a deeper dip in 20 and a longer recovery period, so that by 2025, lodging taxes are back to where they were. So if I show this on a graph, the dotted line shows our baseline scenario, and the solid lines show the best and worst case scenarios. So that results over this period from 2020 to 2025. In the best case scenario, it's a $4.6 billion loss. In the worst case, it's $6.8 billion loss. So that's where we are. So this is obviously presents some serious challenges to DMOs, to convention centers and other public private agencies that are dependent on this revenue stream. And every DMO I've talked to is going through a lot of pain in furloughing people. This loss of revenue is so severe that it's going to require remedial action. That I don't believe we can wait for this recovery in order to have continue our DMOs to continue to be healthy and our convention centers to continue to be able to operate and be healthy. So there's going to have to be some remedial action taken. The irony of the problem is that defunding DMOs are defunding the very thing you need to get this industry working well again. And so somehow that has to be addressed. So I think, there's certain things that are being done right now, like some governments are going to need to refinance their debt. So their reserves may be insufficient to cover them over this period. They're relying on lodging tax revenues to repay a convention center debt or some other, or debt for an arena. And we are working on some projects right now where we're doing studies that support debt refinancing so that agencies, cities, states, and special districts don't have to default on their debt to cover debt service over the next 2, 3 years as revenues have declined. We've also seen the temporary closures of convention centers and the reductions of DMO operations that are requiring employee furloughs. But the important thing, I think, is to seek replacement revenues. And there is only one source of replacement revenues ultimately in the U.S. today, and that's the federal government, the Federal Reserve, and the federal government. The Federal Reserve has pledged $500 billion in basically free loans to cities and states, so they can create money that way. The good news is that money can be borrowed by the federal government with historically low interest rates. So the money is there to do it. It just has to be created by the federal government. So concerns about deficits need to be tossed completely to the side. And so the government aid to state and local governments is going to rebound to DMOs and to convention centers ultimately, right? Because if they're not fiscally healthy, they're not going to be able. They may even want to grab lodging tax revenues for general fund purposes. They may want to redirect it, but they need to get this kind of temporary funding and then pump that through to support the tourism industries, which, as we know, are so vital to the economy. It just makes good economic sense. 1 in 20 jobs in the U.S. are associated with the hospitality industry. If we want to get this economy moving, we're going to have to support that industry and get it back on its feet. So, I think these kind of dire predictions are useful in that it shows the imperative that the federal government step in and actually support the hospitality industry. And I think now is not the time to stop planning for future investment. However long the recovery takes, it is a temporary situation, and cities and DMOs that emerge with a plan of action are ones that are going to be in a stronger position to take advantage of this future growth. So that's my take on it, and I'd be more than happy to answer questions.
Great. Thomas, thank you so much. If you do have questions from the audience, please use the button on the bottom nav that says Q&A to ask those questions. I've got one for you, Tom, before we take up any of the others that may have been coming in. And I know Spiro's been watching for those from his office. And you kind of touched on it, that we know there's going to be some grabbing of dedicated room tax that was contracted to a DMO. We know that that's a knee-jerk reaction. It's an understandable knee-jerk reaction. I remind people that none other than Bill Marriott, after 9/11, suggested that all room taxes be done away with for a year to jumpstart the economy. And we all went, Bill? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But so I mean, it's a response that it's a natural response. We've seen some communities say that they want to defer, and I'm not as worried about deferment, although in the short run that's tough for a DMO. But if it's the ones who are talking about forgiveness of room taxes, how do we counter that knee-jerk reaction of wanting to help but helping in the wrong way?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the earlier questions. What should hoteliers do about average daily room rate? And I think the argument to make is that the savings to a hotel from not having to pay lodging taxes is sort of would allow them to reduce rate or not reduce rate as much, right? But in this environment, a rate reduction is going to do absolutely nothing to convince someone to stay at your hotel. They're not staying at your hotel, one, because they can't afford to travel, or because they're afraid of dying, right? So what hotels need to do is convince their visitors that it's safe to come to their hotel. They need to be out ahead of this, and they need to invest to do that, and they need lodging tax to do that. DMOs need to do this as well. Explain why our attractions are safe to visit. It really is all about overcoming the health concerns so that people who have the resources to travel feel comfortable doing so. So, penny pinching around this is not going to solve that problem. It's not going to get you anywhere.
Agreed, my friend. All right, Spiro, do we have any other questions in queue?
We do not. We do not. We've had great attendance today. And with that, Jennifer, I know you went through significant difficulty to get to the Star office today after the storms took out your power. And Tom, I thought you said you were going to put a little bit nicer spin on your. Everybody read your report the last couple of weeks, and we're looking for windows to jump out of.
Luckily, I'm on the first floor.
Yeah,
so I'm safe.
I'm on the second floor, and it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm hearing today is, and I've asked Jennifer for her the Star analysis of where we're going to go as a destination. I do hear some, and I want to couch it, but I do hear some interstate location, non-urban, small town. And I think that's going to tie into what we're going to talk about on Wednesday with our two speakers on that date, Arrivalist and Destination Analysts. Thank you. And they're talking about what consumer sentiment is. But Tom, you hit it on the head, as well as we have to show, and I wrote an article about this a couple weeks ago, and I've been talking, everyone I've been talking to, it's like we're no longer in the restaurant business or the hotel business or the DMO business. We are in the building consumer confidence business. We've got to show them in our messaging and our social media, I believe, and other ways of why they're not going to come to our place, and to use Tom's phrase, and die. That we've got this, that we're cleaning, we're using the most current techniques, that we're doing the things that are going to keep people safe. I think we all have to kind of start looking through that prism as we move forward.
If I could add maybe more of a note of optimism, and something that I've observed that I think applies to the South Shore, is that what we saw, and I saw this particularly like in San Antonio, for example, after 9/11, that market hardly got hit at all in 9/11. It showed some flattening, but it didn't really decline. And what happened was that people were doing staycations. They were doing car vacations instead of getting on airplanes. They were driving to vacation destinations. And San Antonio was the beneficiary of that because it's a great drive-in destination for Texas. And there was plenty of tourism travel to support it during that period. And I think the South Shore, while it's not San Antonio, it shares some of those characteristics. It's driving from Chicago, it's driving from Indianapolis in Michigan. It is, and it has amenities like the state park that are safer bets in terms of travel. So I really think that the South Shore could be tremendously successful in recovery and do it much faster than major urban markets, for example, that are more dependent on convention group business. As Jennifer pointed out, group demand is going to be the slowest to recover. Well, you're not dependent on that. You're dependent more on individual leisure travel, and you have an affordable travel destination. So I think it puts you in a much more advantageous position than many DMOs in major urban markets.
Well, we're coming right up on 3 minutes before the hour. We've had great attendance today. I was looking at, we've had representatives from both of our United States Senators' offices. We have hoteliers. We have representatives of municipal government. We have a number of our board of directors on the phone. We have someone from the construction and building trades. So we've had a great attendance. I'd like to thank everyone. And again, on behalf of our board of directors, Jennifer, Tom, anything else? Final thoughts? Jennifer, any response to Tom's report that you want to share?
Yeah, no, Tom, that was fascinating. I love seeing the interplay of top 25 markets and those metrics. It's always great to see our data used in such a thoughtful way and that angle on it. One thing I typically include in a presentation, but there were just so many data slides that I did not, was just looking in terms of the supply and the pipeline in Lake County. There's been a lot of new supply that has opened up there in recent year or two, but as I look at the pipeline projecting out, based on our systems, we show 2 properties in final planning to open in 2021 and then 6 in the planning stages for 2022. So I think just the market is poised in terms of pipeline and new supply coming in, that there hadn't been anything projected to open up this year, and that we're seeing right now construction windows taking longer to finish, and we're seeing properties drop off and go into an abandon or deferral phase right now in the pipeline. So I think the softening of that new supply growth on your market will obviously help in terms of having some new properties there, but nothing due in the near future to help that as well.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I would invite both of you to join us on Wednesday, if time permits, to hear the 2 great conversations from our panelists. And with that, we still have with us about 53 people that stayed the whole day, or the whole hour, which is fantastic, and a number of Facebook watchers. So thank you very much. We will have this available on our YouTube channel in short order. And I really do appreciate both of your times. Jennifer, thank you for everything you did to be with us today, because I know you had a very difficult evening. And Tom, you take care, and we'll see you. Bill, my friend, outstanding job as always, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you, everybody, and make sure to
everybody.
Wednesday seminar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. Stay well.